You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got Lisa, the Occult Reject mad scientist, joining me tonight. What is up, Lisa? How are you?
Just fine. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, it's been a while since we've kind of really done like a strictly paranormal show. And finally got someone on that I've had booked for a minute. I've been very much looking forward to this. And tonight we got Gina Black. Gina, what is up? Thank you so much for coming on the Occult Rejects tonight. I guess real quick, if you don't mind, let everybody know kind of like what your deal is, what you do with the paranormal and all that, and where they can find your stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Gina Black, and I am a paranormal investigator. I'm also a photographer, blogger, and I am working on a book about cemetery symbolism. I absolutely love learning about the history of sculpture and the hidden meanings that our ancestors were trying to hide for us to find. It's kind of like a fun treasure hunt. And I think that it's an interesting thing that I want to bring back into the conversation of modern times. So I love visiting interesting, creepy, spooky places. I travel the world and I like to go to haunted locations as well as historic cemeteries. So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at SheHaunts, and you can check out my blog and my photos there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. You know, one thing I did want to ask, like with the cemeteries and graveyards, do you think there is actually like, I would assume maybe because what you're trying to explain, like the symbolism, do you think it's like occult symbolism in a sense?
It can be. It absolutely can be. There are some, I would say, hidden symbolisms that could absolutely, fall under the occult umbrella. I would say more of it that we see in our modern cemeteries is from the Victorian era. And during the Victorian era, there was this really big shift in really focusing on hidden meanings. And there's just a wealth of information that is waiting to be kind of rediscovered, because over time, less and less people would go to cemeteries. They kind of fell out of fashion. Even in the United States, as a society, we used to go to cemeteries on Sundays after church, and you would have a picnic with your family and you would sit and reminisce about your loved one. And then, the public parks were really pushed more to the forefront. Public parks were created, so people really weren't going to cemeteries anymore, and it just kind of fell out of vogue. And nowadays, all of that is lost. And unless you're talking to an old timer or somebody who maybe is giving a cemetery tour, you might not even really realize what these hidden meanings are. So for me, it's just been a really cool journey to kind of decipher all of these little treasure hunt situations around the world. And I absolutely love it. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. No, it definitely looks like it from the stuff I've seen you post. I just find that interesting. It's like, even like the person's like on their way out the door, they're dead and they're still dropping symbolism on their tombstone. Like you can't stop.
Yeah,
like your final resting place and you still had to leave a symbol for something. That's funny.
And a lot of people plan them out before they pass.
That's what I'm getting at.
The artwork planned out, yeah.
No, that's what I'm getting at.
They wanted to say, like a quote or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
A real occultist is going to make sure that gravestone has something on there.
Oh, yeah.
What's some of the craziest places that you've... You know what, actually, I'll bring this up first, and then maybe that will kind of lead us into it. I did want to pull up some of the photos. I did see you post on Instagram some of the graveyards and cemeteries you've been to. I'm going to pull those up real quick. This place, you can see it, correct?
Yes.
Do you remember
that was in the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris. It is most notably, I think a lot of people might know it because that's the final resting place of Jim Morrison. And when I was in Paris last summer, I was just, I went to Paris specifically for this cemetery and for the catacombs. And it is just an incredible property filled with amazing sculpture.
Oh, wow. Jim Morrison's there, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty big. There was a lot of things like that. What made you go to this place? Was that one of the reasons why, like, because of Jim Morrison, really, or?
Well, as someone who's an enthusiast of cemetery sculpture, Père Lachaise is actually the most visited cemetery in the world. And it's an interesting place because there's just so many examples of cemetery symbolism. When you look at these monuments and you look at these sculptures and you look at the headstones, you'll see things like, the wreath on the door just below where you were just, showing the wreath represents eternal life, the idea that life and death are kind of a encircling situation. It's just the beginning of what's coming next. And you see the different flowers. They all have different symbolisms. If you see on to the right there where there's the urn, it looks like covered in a veil. Basically, when you see fabric draped over areas of a headstone or a mausoleum, it represents the veil between life and death. And sometimes we're just beyond the veil from our loved one. And the memento mori of that is, hey, this is where I am, and so will you be one day. So it's a reminder of, live life to the fullest. So you get these interesting motifs throughout the cemetery in that property in Paris.
Something I want to ask, a silly question. Maybe I don't even know if you know the answer to it. Is this like a predominantly Catholic cemetery, or is it a Catholic cemetery?
I would say so. There's mostly Catholic graves, but there are others that weren't Catholic. I actually witnessed a few that had. There was a few that had skulls. There were a few that. Now the other thing is the direction of the graves. So in a Catholic plot, you are always going to face east. Now, if you see a grave or a plot that's facing another direction, that typically meant back in the Victorian times that you were either exiled from the church, or perhaps you were protesting against the church, or you were either accused of witchcraft or you were proclaiming you were a witch, because people that faced the west were not aligned with the church. So that's another thing that's kind of interesting about that property, and you do see some of that.
Yeah, it's just like even like this stuff here. It's just constant things I've always seen. I find it interesting how it's always either on Masonic buildings in Catholic churches. Same architecture, this thing in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I asked if it was Catholic, because I was like, if it's
you
not
see
Catholic,
that,
that's interesting.
in the Birth of Venus painting, which was a famous painting that, I forget who the artist was, but you see that kind of iconic sculpture behind her. Yes, it's very similar. And, they're mimicking the Romans, they're mimicking the ancient Greeks. And you see that a lot in the Victorian cemeteries, is they were really looking at these romantic statues and they were taking that inspiration into the cemetery.
Yeah, I actually was looking. I don't have it with me. I can't find it fast enough, but maybe later. I actually, that photo that you talk about, I actually use that a lot to show how I think it's actually, silly as it sounds, that painting is depicting the inside of your eyeball.
Inside of your eyeball?
Yes.
Really?
I'll see if I can try to pull it up later. Maybe while you're talking, I can try to find, because I can show you the comparison. It's when we did it at Occult, we did a series on occult symbolism. It's all inside your head or something, and we focused on the eyeballs. Yeah, I do actually think that painting is, believe it or not, from the eyeball.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly why I think this art is on Catholic churches, is because I think they actually understood the eyeball as well.
Yeah, most of these sculptors back in the time of when they were making all of these sculptures, they were closeted anatomists, in that they were digging up bodies and doing, I guess, dissections on cadavers. They were obsessed with the anatomy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Leonardo da Vinci was actually one of the most prolific, artists that also did a lot of dissections in his notebooks, and did a lot of incredible work that was very much kind of hidden from time for, hundreds of years before it was rediscovered. It's very interesting.
Oh, this one's wild. I like this one. Where's this one at?
That is at the same property in Paris, and you're going to see that wreath that they're holding up, and that means, not only does it mean eternity, as it mean life is a continuation, death and life are the same thing, but it also, in this case, it's representing victory because they're holding it up. So the way I would interpret this sculpture is that this man who is on the top of the pedestal is someone who was victorious in life. Maybe he was a successful businessman. Maybe he was a successful military person, and he wants to be recognized for these accomplishments. The wreath also, depending on how you look at it, some people look at wreaths as definitely going back to the Roman and ancient Greek times, because they would put a wreath on top of your head if you won the Olympics, or if you were a military person or royalty in Rome, you would wear a wreath on top of your head. So that could also play into the symbolism. But what I found so impressive about this particular sculpture when I took this photo, is this is all bronze. This is an absolute incredible sculpture that, in my opinion, is worthy of being in a museum somewhere, and you're just going to see it in a park-like setting. And it's just an interesting part of, the cultural history that's in the background of Paris. Because when you think of Paris, you think, oh, I'm going to go to the Eiffel Tower, I'm going to go to the Louvre, I'm going to go to all these places. But you don't think to go to the cemetery unless you're spooky, like, some of us are. But there is a huge, huge amount of wealth in this cemetery of all types of artwork. And it's, in my opinion, one of the best I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I'm selling it. I don't work for the cemetery, guys. I absolutely, I love it.
I'm wondering if a lot of the stuff I got is actually from that one spot, because it all does kind of look like the same type of impressive architecture.
This one, yeah.
Yeah, all right, we'll go to the next one.
Okay, this one is actually from New Orleans. Yes, this one was from New Orleans, and the Metairie Cemetery. And this is, a lot of people think to go just immediately to Lafayette No. 1 or Lafayette No. 2, which are within the city limits, kind of the downtown area, very close to the Garden District. But this one is just outside of the city proper. And this place was recommended to me by a friend who lives in the area. And she said, listen, you love sculpture, you got to go to this place, because there are some incredible examples of mausoleums. Because in New Orleans, most people are buried above ground because they're below sea level. So you're going to see a lot of crypts, and you're going to see a lot of these beautiful mausoleums. So this particular one, when I was on the property, I walked up to it just wanting to get a closer look of this beautiful stained glass window. And lo and behold, the doors were open. So we got to step inside, and we got to see the glass a little closer. It was a really nice experience.
Did you happen to notice on the glass, like depending on like which way you angled it, like looked at the light, you might have seen different etching in there?
I actually took a close-up of this, which was the second photo in that series.
Yeah,
and I didn't really notice anything at the time, but with all art, there's room for interpretation. Yeah. And I certainly think that depending on, there it is. So you got it. Yes, absolutely. You can look at this, perhaps as we have the top area looks kind of like a sun that might represent, in a lot of imagery, the sun represents Jesus Christ, because he's considered the Son of God. So that could be some symbolism there. There might even be some crucifixes in there if you look closely, some flowers. When you're looking at art and there's a lot of flowers and there's a lot of Christian images with the flowers, I learned actually that there is a flower that it comes up a lot in Christian art known as the Passion Flower, or the kind of linked to the Passion of Christ. And that particular flower comes up a lot within paintings of Bible scenes, and it represents Jesus and the Holy Trinity. So that could be part of it. But there are some interesting colors in this one, which you normally do not find in mausoleums. So this one definitely stood out from the crowd. And of course, this was designed for that space. The Metairie, I may not be pronouncing that correctly, Metairie, and it's in New Orleans.
Awesome. All right, on to the next one. Here we go.
Either Metairie or Metairie, perhaps. Metairie. Something along those lines. Ooh, this is a cool spot that I absolutely loved. So I have this funny thing that happens, and I swear it's not something I plan, but whenever I travel, I always get Airbnbs, because a lot of times I might be staying for a week to 2 weeks. And in this particular trip, I was in London, and I was staying in an area, a suburb of London known as Hampstead. And this is the Hampstead Cemetery. Now, it's not considered, if you've ever heard of the Marvelous Seven, which are the 7 very famous properties of London, this is not considered one. However, it has some incredible sculpture. And what I thought was kind of interesting during my research was the Hempstead Cemetery was kind of mentioned in some articles about the Highgate Cemetery vampire, which is not far away. And there was a lot of kind of interesting information that was shared in these publications that kind of scared the community into thinking that there were vampires in the 1970s. So it was a pretty interesting time. And this particular property was about 1 block from where I was staying. And it just had some really, really, really cool sculpture in it.
Yeah, that thing looks, I think it's pretty cool. All right.
So this was also that same property that I mentioned before from New Orleans. And you can see just the incredible details and the scale of how these mausoleums are designed is truly, truly, truly just, very inspiring. And you'll see on this one, we have Gothic elements from Gothic churches. There's also some ancient Greek elements with the Corinthian style columns. You'll see those a lot in ancient Greece and Rome. And you see just these beautiful, beautiful tiny details that were all hand carved, because none of these were cookie cutter in any way. The family had to commission an artist to come and sculpt these pieces.
True.
These particular mausoleums, they remind me of a birth canal.
Oh.
Like almost like you come into this world in a birth canal and you exit it out.
I love that. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's the idea of life and death and the cycle of life. That's very interesting. I really like that.
And then this one?
Also in New Orleans.
Yeah, that's what
this one, you can see that there's, we have the angel up top. The angels are always a representation of messengers from God. And in some cases, when the angel is looking down over the deceased person's plot, this might mean that they're being looked after or they're being watched over from heaven. And, it's just that I always personally love to find cemetery angels. It's actually, for me, whenever I see one, I always have to photograph them. And they have such a presence, it's just a peaceful watcher kind of presence in a cemetery that I always really, really care for.
This one I thought was cool as hell.
Oh yeah. This is also in New Orleans. I really love this one as well. And now
Egyptian.
A fun fact is the Victorian era was very, very into the ancient Egyptian artwork. And around that time, during the 1800s, there was a lot of excavations going on of tombs. And we had all of this information coming out about explorers finding riches and, pyramids. And all of this was in the forefront in the papers. And it became fascinating for the Victorians. So you see a lot of that in cemeteries. You might see a sphinx, you might see a pyramid, but this one, they really went all out. And you have up top here with the wings and that circular element that represents the sun god Ra.
Yeah.
And I think that the female figure on the left is some sort of goddess. I'm not exactly sure who, but certainly someone who's welcoming the spirits into the afterlife, by kind of raising that hand, kind of bringing them to the afterlife is kind of the way I read that statue. But absolutely incredible detail, really.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And, sorry, I have to control it from here. This one, I'm assuming, is this the same one?
Yeah, same property.
Yeah.
I usually do them in a series. So if I visit a property, I'll kind of release them all around the same time. But yes, this is also New Orleans. And this certainly had a lot of Catholic imagery on this one. And, I absolutely love to see when you see these figures draped in cloaks and shrouds. It's just a beautiful, the way that they hug the body is a very interesting thing in sculpture. And it's very hard to do as an artist. I'm also a painter and I draw. And when you're drawing fabric like that, I can't even imagine sculpting fabric like that. It's so difficult to make it look natural. And this is just a beautiful example of one.
Oh, did I show this one earlier? Yeah.
Yes, that's the one with the stained glass. Okay, so this is one that was taken in the Highgate Cemetery in London. Highgate is a very famous cemetery. And I had mentioned before there was a vampire panic. I think it was actually the 1968. Was it 1970s? I think it was 1968 was the vampire panic, but it happened in this property. And people actually thought there were vampires sleeping and hiding away in this cemetery, which is pretty interesting. As you know, this local lore goes, it's pretty wild. And it was something that the local papers were actually publishing, and people on talk shows were actually putting out there to the public. So it was a big panic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And when was that again?
I'm just gonna double check here. I want to say it was 1968. Let me see. Highgate.
That's very recent.
It was very recent, and people really thought that there were vampires.
Lansdale was behind that. He's probably dead, right?
What happened?
I was joking about there was this guy who worked for the CIA. His last name was Lansdale, and he went over to the Philippines and actually had people out in the woods thinking that there was vampires killing people because they were hanging people from the trees and like stabbing them in the neck.
Oh.
Yeah, they're trying to like literally scare people, the Filipino people that they thought might have been like harboring communists. So they're like literally made people think that there was vampires out there, and then they were flying around in helicopters, like sending like messages out, sounding it was like ghosts and making it sound like they were getting haunted. Yeah, and the people started believing it.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. So this was actually, it's saying 1970s. I knew it was the end of this. It says late 60s, early 70s. So it was in that time era of the vampires of this property. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I got that close.
No, that's very recent.
Yeah, and it was an occult society, and they were hanging out in the cemetery, and they claimed to see a vampire walking around, and they sat down and they were interviewed, and all these people were listening to these two guys, and they were saying, "Oh, I saw a vampire," and "Oh, I saw it too," and they claimed that they were finding animals in the cemetery drained of all of their blood, and they riled up, when I tell you, mobs of people, okay, came into the cemetery, and they were taking graves, they were opening up vaults in their catacomb area where they had caskets, kind of like in a wall. And they were ripping open these caskets and staking the bodies inside. And this was the late 60s, early 70s. It went on in London, of all places.
Is this a premise for Interview with a Vampire?
No, it's not actually, but it's interesting. I thought it was kind of cool because, now we have Nosferatu and everybody that's back on, on everyone's radar because they did the remake. And then we have this local story that really kind of riled people up and had people in a panic. So,
Gina, I'm going to ask one more question. I apologize. Do you happen to know what occult society was? It was.
I know the guy's name was Sean Manchester, and I believe the other guy's name was. I'll find it for you. I can send you. I can't send something to the chat. I don't know if I'm able to do that. So.
Oh, you might be able to send a link in the private chat, and I can pick that up.
Okay.
That's so interesting, though, and it was so recent.
It was so recent.
So people were believing
the name is a British Occult Society. So the British Occult Society, it was Sean Manchester and David Farrant were the two guys that were in the British Occult Society. And what happened was there was some vandalism the day after Halloween in the cemetery, right? So what do you think that would be? If you went to the cemetery the day after Halloween, what would be your first thought? Kids, maybe hanging out on Halloween, doing something they're not supposed to, right? Like maybe
I would figure the night before Halloween and Halloween, you got 2 days of stuff going on in there.
Yeah, so instead of, kids being kids and taking it to where it should have been, this occult society starts claiming that they're seeing dark figures walking around in the cemetery. And they took an interview with the Hempstead Press, and they took an interview with, you know, various other publications. They get on TV, everybody's putting microphones in their face, and they are just telling these tall tales, and they're freaking everybody out. So it, you know, it's an interesting thing. And if you go to this property today, so of course I had to take the tour because, you know, I am who I am, and I wanted to talk to a guide and, you know, find out all the hidden information. And what's wild is, you know, there are still some areas of the cemetery to this day that are damaged from that time of all of the riots and the people that came in and vandalized thinking that they were looking for vampires. So it's pretty crazy.
Nice. Real quick, if you don't mind, though, actually, I'll show this real fast just to get this over with. I don't know how easily you'll see it, but.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and like even the thing is too, like under that round part, like kind of where like the real tip of the eye, I mean that's water as well, and then the back of the eye has like blood. So I mean, there's even water under, you know, even water underneath the seashell. I do think it's quite possible that's you know.
There's interesting parallels for sure.
Yeah. Now some of the symbolism, and then we'll get into like some of your experiences. But like, isn't there? I know there was something you were talking about with the crown on your own Instagram thing. Maybe you want to get into that. Maybe a couple other things that you've picked up on symbolism for graveyards and cemeteries.
Sure. Yeah. So the crown, a lot of people think, you know, when you see a crown on a grave that it instant means royalty, but a lot of people believe that it is a follower of God. And if you follow Christianity, it's said that as long as you're faithful and you believe in God, you will have a place in heaven. You will be brought into the afterlife, into heaven, and you will receive your place in heaven when you pass. And therefore you will be part of that royal afterlife with the crown. So that's pretty interesting. And it kind of also looks, if you kind of dissect it, it means someone who really lived a life without sin, someone who lived in a way that was holy. So you're kind of looking at victory against, you know, victory against death, victory against sin, someone who kept a very straight and narrow. So that's typically what the crown represents. Now, you can find the crown in other ways too. You might find it on an angel. And of course, the angels are considered messengers from God. They're considered spirit guides or people, you know, entities that come down to bring the deceased to heaven. If you see one with a crown, that might just be that, you know, along the same lines that they're members of heaven. I've also seen the crown with a snake. And in certain Greek cultures and Roman cultures, snakes are not bad. They're not considered, you know, the negative bad guy. In a lot of ancient texts, snakes were also considered healers. And, you know, so if you might also see if someone's Greek Orthodox or someone is, you know, Roman Catholic, you might see a snake with the crown. And that meant just somebody who was healed by Christ or someone who perhaps was a very holy person, and they gave that, they kind of lived that lifestyle and affected others in a positive way.
You know, something that's making me think about, and I'm not saying it's necessarily this, because this is like taking it to possibly conspiratorial, or it could be true. I think it was recently somebody on my show or it was in the chat was talking about, I think it was on the show, like eagle and snake symbolism and how it's kind of like two different bloodlines sometimes of a family. So I'm wondering, like, if there is actually snake symbolism on the stuff, would that somehow go along with that? If that whole idea is even true.
Well, you know, a lot of, you know, people look at the snake as being part of the underworld, or actually, in truth be told, in the Bible, a lot of people look at snakes as being the devil, because the devil took on a form that could enter the Garden of Eden and tempt Eve to eat the apple. It was the snake that told her to eat the apple. Therefore, the snake was the devil enticing her to commit sin. And a lot of texts in the Bible will look at the snake in a very negative way, but certain areas of Christianity don't. And it's just interesting. I don't know. Yeah. You know, for me personally, I like snakes. I think snakes are pretty interesting. I think they're really cool looking. Yeah. I have a friend that has a snake, but you know, it's everybody feels the way they feel about it. It's, you know, each their own, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I was like, who knows why it could be there. Yeah.
In Latin America, they're revered. Pre-Columbus or whatever. But yeah, most of the indigenous religions or belief systems revere the snake. They believe that that was, it meant life. It meant, connection to, all of the dimensions and whatever. And so I've heard, and this wasn't on the show that you said, Nick, but I had heard, but in relation to the eagle, that the symbolism of the eagle and the snake was Christianity conquering the indigenous, because Christianity was the eagle or the line of the eagle, and then the serpent was the feathered serpent of the belief system of the indigenous. So I don't know. It's just things that you hear, right? And you just,
I've never heard that, but I could see it making sense.
Mm-hmm.
What about any other things that you've come across that you've noticed, like common?
Common. So I think one of the most common that I see a lot of, which I absolutely love and I seek them out, I think they're really beautiful, is the weeping willow. So in a lot of Victorian properties, you're going to see the weeping willow, which is a tree that, if you can picture it, has a very large trunk and it has just these beautiful kind of hanging branches that sway in the wind. You see them a lot in the South. Now, the weeping willow is an interesting symbolism. So the willow tree, that is a tree that represents eternal life. But the weeping willow really took on a symbolism of its own during the Victorian times, because women would wear veils, right? So if someone in your family, let's say your husband, passed away, you would be expected to wear a veil in mourning. And these women were required to wear that veil in public for a very long period of time. And they wanted to be seen around town as someone who was in mourning. And a lot of people kind of compared the likeness of the veil of the woman in mourning to that of the weeping willow's branches. And another kind of symbolism too is during funerals, of course, if you're exhibiting signs of mourning, you might be crying. And if you see the tears, streaming down someone's face, it might look similar to the branches of a willow and all the tiny little leaves that kind of hang from them. So it just became kind of really a very popular motif to see on a headstone. And you also see them in some cases, and I have seen them a lot in the South, on cemetery gates. You'll also see them on, whether it's a cemetery gate for the whole property or a gate around a plot. It's a very common image that you might find.
I'll have to look out for that now. I've never really noticed the weeping willow. Interesting. All right, so what about now, I guess maybe some of your experiences. Did you do anything recently that you had fun with?
Yeah, so recently I went with my paranormal team. We met up with another paranormal team. So my team is called Afterlife All Stars, and we're in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area in South Florida. And we met up with another team from up north known as Paranormal 5-4. And we joined those guys for an investigation of the old Hamilton jail. And the old Hamilton jail is in North Florida. It's basically on the Florida-Georgia line. And it is just this really interesting old jail. And we had just an incredible investigation. It was a really interesting night. We as we got there, it started raining, and it just rained and rained and rained. And this old jail just got flooded, and we continued to investigate. And it was just, we were kind of like dealing with all of this, but we had a really great time. And you mentioned earlier off before we went on air about the SLS camera. And the SLS camera is a favorite of mine. It is a camera that basically, you see it a lot on the ghost hunting shows. And it's that camera, if you picture it, it's on a tablet. And it's attached to a little mechanism very similar to what you see on an Xbox. And what it's doing is it's mapping movement. So if you were, let's say, playing Xbox and you were doing like a tennis game and you were pretending to hit the tennis racket to get the ball, it's mapping your movement so that it can bring that movement into the game. So what they noticed when they were using this technology, that it might map things in the room that aren't supposed to be there. Movement in the room, figures in the room that aren't necessarily in the room. So ghost hunters took this on a tablet and they started using it on investigations. I don't know who was the first to use it. I remember seeing it on shows like Ghost Adventures. But basically now you can get it at a lot of different ghost hunting stores, and you can have this tablet and you can use it. And it doesn't matter if it's a pitch dark room, you can use it low light, and sometimes it picks up figures. So you'll see a full stick and dot figure on your camera, And in some cases, like mine at the jail, you can interact with it. And that's where it gets interesting, because if you start interacting with this stick figure, then it kind of feels more tangible as something that could be paranormal. So in our case, we were kind of checking out the upstairs area where they had all the jail cells. And one of my investigators was inside the jail cell next to a bed, a bunk bed, and a little figure appeared on the camera. It appeared like it was crouched inside the bunk. So she reaches her hand out as if to touch it. And you see this thing just kind of punching and kicking. It really didn't want her anywhere near it. And then when she backed away, it backed away. And it was just such an interesting interaction. And it went on for over a minute until all of a sudden it just disappeared. Now, you might say that that's, okay, maybe that's paranormal, Gina. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But in addition to my SLS camera, there was another investigator with me on another SLS camera, and he picked it up too. So we had two different cameras picking up this figure in a dark jail cell. And it was just
impressive, kind of.
It was really incredible. It really was. And
I've never
we
thought of that,
continued to
using
have
two.
that. Yeah.
To like one to verify the other one. That is interesting.
Yeah, it was cool. It was really fun.
Even if it's like, I would say at least it calibrated the same.
Well, the thing is, what it does is have you used one of these before? Are you familiar with them?
No.
They map the whole room. So you're going to see little blips of, like, let's say if you put it in your living room, you'll see a little blip around the couch. You'll see a little blip on the chairs. But if you see a full stick figure moving around, that's not normal. And then sometimes if you get close to it, it might disappear. Maybe that's nothing. But if you start interacting with it and you say something like, okay, raise your right arm, and it raises its right arm. Okay, come over and give me a high five, and you get a high five. That's
you get stuff like that?
Anomaly. Oh yeah, we interact with it. We'll try to reach out and see if it touches us, and we'll say, okay, if you're a spirit in the room, can you walk closer to me? And the spirit might, the little stick and dot figure might move closer. So if you start asking questions and you get these intelligent responses, whether they be, however on your equipment, it's just an interesting thing. And as far as my research goes, I think the SLS camera is worth every penny. And I've been using it a lot more recently, and I just have nothing but nice things to say about it. I think it's really cool. And if you get a chance to try one in a haunted location, it might really open your eyes to what's there.
That is fascinating.
No, I do find them very interesting. Yeah. The only thing that I think there's a reason why I didn't. There's a couple of reasons why I didn't get it, but do they make them yet to where they actually will record it?
You can, but the problem is
that when it shuts off, it doesn't stay, right?
Well, what it is it really eats the battery of the tablet.
Oh.
So we usually just record the screen. And that is, as far as I understand, pretty much a problem across all brands. It's just something with the software, and it just really eats through the battery on the tablet. And if you record, it goes even faster. So we tend to just record on another device.
All right. No, I think I was told a different reason why. But no, I get that. That makes sense. Yeah, can take up a lot of battery.
Yeah.
Did you get any other experiences at that same place besides that?
So I had an interesting experience in the solitary confinement, and so what happened was we had a bunch of investigators, and they were in the main jail area. So we kind of took over the kitchen space as our kind of like nerve centers. We had our equipment, there were some, cameras set up and other things. And the solitary was in another building. So what I did was I brought my recorder, I went into solitary, and I just stood there. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't move. I just stood still. And when I tell you, the only sound that you can hear was just the rain falling outside. There was nothing. Or you're in the middle of nowhere in Jasper. It's just, rural. And so I was in there for, I would say about maybe 10, 15 minutes. And now I am very honest on my investigations. I don't get scared very easily. I do not, I'm one of those people, I freeze. I don't run, I freeze. So in this situation, my heart was beating out of my chest. I just felt like there was something negative around me. I kept looking over my shoulder because I kept feeling like there was something in the room. And as soon as my time was up, I bolted, right? So I bring my recorder back to our nerve center and we listen to it. And there was just some very inaudible growling sounds going on and kind of like grunting. And this was, as I mentioned, otherwise silent other than raindrops outside. So it was a very controlled space, no extra noise, nobody else in the room. And it certainly wasn't me. And that truly kind of freaked me out because I knew that there was no sounds in there, but I felt as if my body, the antenna, was noticing a pulse in the air, as if I wasn't alone. And that intuition that somebody's behind you, I kept getting it. So that was pretty interesting. And then the last thing that we did that was really wild was before we ended the night, because, the rain was just getting bad. It was really flooding in this jail. But before we left, we did what's known as an Estes session. And in an Estes session, an investigator wears noise-canceling headphones, a blindfold so you can't see anybody in the room. This is essentially sensory deprivation.
Is this like the God mask, but like a different version of it?
Like
the God helmet, I think they call it, the God helmet. I've seen other people do it where it's like you basically like cutting off all your senses.
So there's another experiment called the Gansfeld experiment. Maybe you might be thinking that's with the red lights.
Did you see Hellier?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it was the thing they used in that. I think maybe Ghost Adventures might have used it once or twice. All right, sorry.
They do, but a lot of investigators, it's very popular, use the Estes method, which is you have headphones on. The headphones are going to be plugged into a spirit box. You can't hear anything but the spirit box, and you're wearing a blindfold. The idea is you speak. If you're the one in the test subject, you speak what you hear through the spirit box, right? Everyone else in the room quietly asks questions, and essentially the spirits speak through the spirit box through you. So in this situation, I'm in the jail cell. I'm in the same jail cell, by the way, as I was earlier talking about, where we caught a figure kind of kicking and punching. I'm sitting on that bed. I'm sitting with another investigator to my side. And they were asking questions. I can't hear them. I'm just speaking what I hear through the spirit box. But I'll tell you what freaked me out and what made me end that session was through the white noise of this spirit box, okay? I heard my maiden name. Now, my maiden name is a name, I'm not going to say it, but it is very Italian and it's very uncommon. In my lifetime, I maybe had 2 or 3 people say it correctly without me having to explain the pronunciation. And I heard my name clear as day, spoken through the spirit box. And when I heard that, I took off the headphones and I said, sorry guys, but I'm done because that was too much for me. And I've never experienced anything like that in my life.
Holy moly. That's freaky.
It was very freaky. It was very, very, very freaky. And I used a lot of sage before I left that property. I'll tell you that. I was just outside just with the sage, just, dancing in the smoke because I did not want to bring any of that home with me.
We've been doing vanishing rituals.
Do you think the rain may have enhanced some of the ability to pick up on spirits? You know how they say that water is a good element or a good conduit?
Yes. I think that absolutely it can be. And you're right. That is a common theory that water energizes spirit energy. And that's why a lot of times you hear of hauntings around bodies of water. And it's just something to do with the energy of the water kind of playing off the energy of the spirits, and somehow maybe one energizes the other, who knows. But I have heard that, and absolutely it could have been the case, but it was just, it was a very, very strange night. And the other thing that we were talking with our friends that we were investigating with at Paranormal 54 is, I guess normally a lot of guys investigate, but my team is mostly women, and the people that were on this trip were all female. So we are not sure if maybe having a bunch of females in a prison might have had something to do with the extra aggressive activity. So maybe that had something to do with it too. I don't know, but it was pretty wild.
That is very fascinating. Wow. And when you talk about white noise, do you know what frequency it's at?
So what I do, there's different ways that you can set I don't know the exact frequency, but on a spirit box, you can adjust either FM or AM, and you can adjust how fast the switching of channels is. So you can adjust forward or backward. So I usually do FM forward in a slower pace, something like between like 100 and 150. And sometimes I do AM backward, and I'll do that maybe around 200. But I know what you're saying, and there are certainly some theories that say that certain frequencies are better for spirits to speak through. And actually, one of the co-founder of my paranormal team, his name is Tim Arnwine. He's actually an investigator that's very interested in frequencies, and he's been doing a lot of research on the side to experiment with different frequencies and how maybe some are amplify spirit activity over others. So currently we're kind of workshopping some experiments where we can test to see certain frequencies and how they might affect paranormal activity, but we really don't have, it's just, we just started doing the experiments, so we don't really have too much to report as of right now, but it's very cool.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he's onto something. Y'all are onto something with the frequency as well. I think that's definitely key. It's almost like a better, like we talked about water being a good medium. I think different frequencies have different, better conductivity, like somebody said.
Yeah. 100%, 100%. And that's the thing. We might not be able to tap fully into the spirit world because we're not on the same frequency. And,
exactly.
There's a lot of research to kind of look into what frequencies mean, how they're traveling through time, and it's just an untapped realm, really. And we don't know the answers yet, which makes it so exciting. And I'm definitely just really excited to be part of a team where we have so many interesting minds working together to try new experiments, because, at the end of the day, we're trying to do research to find answers to prove the paranormal. And it's a really interesting field to be a part of.
No, absolutely. It's kind of like we talked about in the I series, that when you look at the entire electromagnetic spectrum given off by the sun, we only see 0.003% of the entire spectrum. And so I wonder if that is even the case with audible, hearing. Like, do we only hear a certain amount for the entire range that exists, or even perception, like what we feel, right? Like in person, like how we feel. Like you said, you felt somebody staring at you from behind or whatever, like that. I mean, does that also have a range that we only feel a certain percentage of the entire range?
Absolutely.
So that's like with these frequencies, I mean, you literally could be like, not tapping into the full capacity of it. Yeah, that's very, very fascinating.
And it's what I find fascinating is we have so many people, and I'm sure there are plenty of the legit people out there that claim to be, psychic or clairvoyant, all, different sensitivities. And I do believe that many people are. I think there are a lot of frauds, but I think that there are many people that naturally have a gift. And you hear it a lot. Certain psychics will be able to find people in the woods, or they'll be able to find a missing child, or, recover a body. There's all kinds of interesting information that we're getting from these psychics. And where are they getting their information from? Now, the thing is, they say we use less than 10% of our brains. So somehow these people are able to tap into a part of their brain that we probably have potential to use, but we can't, for whatever reason, access it. Now, I'm not saying in any way that I am sensitive. I don't believe that I am. However, by putting myself in these situations, by having to listen, by going into a location and sitting quietly for hours, waiting for a response on a spirit box or a recorder, I now am putting myself in a position in these places where I am listening. I am stopping what I'm doing. I have slowed the room down, and I am reading the room. So you become more in tune with yourself, and you become more in tune with your environment. Now, on a regular day, we're going to be hearing all sorts of stimuli. We're going to hear cars running, cars beeping, people talking, kids laughing, dogs barking, all that kind of stuff. But at night, when you're alone or you're in a small group and everyone's silent, you start to pick up on more things that you normally might not pick up on. And I think that that's interesting because I think that I've become more in tune with that over the years. And I think it's always been there. And I think it's possible for anyone to pick up on that, but you just have to kind of put yourself in the headspace. And that could be the case with these people that have these gifts, these psychic abilities to hear things or see things or get messages. And maybe it has something to do with frequencies. Maybe the people like you were mentioning earlier that have schizophrenia, maybe there's some of those voices are not actually, in their brain being made up. Maybe they're tuning into some other ethereal realm. Who knows?
Right.
But I think it's an interesting thing to research. And I think that the more we research and the more we listen and the more we kind of, have an open mind, maybe there'll be more answers eventually. And I just find that to be so fascinating.
I do too. I think you're right. You're training yourself. It's like somebody going through the process of learning what it sounds like, what it feels like, and whatever. And then the more time you spend with it, the more fine tune you're getting in picking it up. That's very fascinating the way you look at it.
Yeah, and like one thing a lot of people say, and I've noticed this because we run investigations publicly. We have people come to our local museum, and we do fundraisers for the museum. And we, host investigations. And one of the most common things that people will say when they are on an investigation is, "Oh, it feels heavy in here," or, "Oh, I feel, this room feels a little different than that room." You're picking up on something in the air that you can't see. And I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of the times they feel that way in certain areas that are hotspots. And maybe that person's never been to that location. So how did they walk into that room and say to me, "I feel heavy in this room. This room has a heaviness to it," without me telling them anything about it? So it's just an interesting thing that I think some people are more in tune with. And I think it's a possibility for everybody to really turn on if they're willing to.
One thing I did want to ask, because it's making me think about the other mask that I've seen. Basically, like they kind of blindfold themselves and then they play, I think, white noise. And then if they start hearing things, they kind of like repeat it or whatever. Or people ask them questions, and if they happen to something, they think they're hearing something, they'll repeat it. Because of the white noise and from other things I've seen in the past, like the Gateway Project, that is it was like a series of tapes that was made that supposedly helped people have out-of-body experiences. I guess it was interesting enough for the government to put people into the place to try the stuff out and see what happens. And, a lot of it, the white noise and all that stuff, the way it works is that it starts like hemi-syncing your brain. And it'll put you into like kind of like maybe possibly a different state to start doing other things. Long story short, the reason why I'm getting into all this stuff is that I do believe in a sense, just me, I think sometimes with paranormal activity, it can be actually done by a person. And it's maybe not actually a haunting. But now what I'm getting at is, like, if that's possible, if you're using these toys when you're trying to do a paranormal, trying to look for paranormal activity, could you be producing it yourself?
That's a good question. And there's actually an experiment, I believe, that came out of Canada. And I think it was called the Philip experiment. And the idea was that they created an entity and they gave it a name, and they all started asking questions and experimenting, and all these investigators kind of came together under the idea that they were speaking to an entity called Philip. And all of these things started happening, and there was never a ghost. It was all made up. And certainly there is something to be said with, if you put your mind to something, maybe your mind can, the power of suggestion. I absolutely believe in that. I think that is absolutely something that could exist and something that could happen. But the thing is, when you're on an investigation, there's going to be things that happen. There might be, like you mentioned earlier, when you had your EMF reader and you were getting readings, that could be paranormal. It might not be paranormal. But it's when things start happening in a succession. So now your EMF reader goes off. There's no electronic devices. Everyone has their cell phones on airplane mode. And then you get a spike on your REM pod, which is measuring the readings in the room. You're getting a spike on that. Then you see your spirit box start saying intelligent responses. Now, someone in the chat earlier asked about spirit boxes, and a lot of times they're just spitting out nonsense. They are. 90% of the time it's nonsense. But when you start getting intelligent words coming through or phrases, and you're getting these other things happening as well, perhaps if you look at it in that sense, you're experiencing a multifaceted experience. I don't want to just see an EMF reader go off and say, "Oh, it's a ghost." But if the EMF, the REM pod, my recorder, the spirit box are all happening in tandem, maybe there's something there. And that's when my interest will be piqued to continue to ask questions in that moment, and maybe ask the right questions, maybe ask a series of questions that is more concentrated in that space. So I found that when you start collecting all of those things together, that the experience becomes more tangible for me. So
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
I do think that in certain cases, it's absolutely possible for an investigator to maybe read something the wrong way. There might be a false positive. It's something you really want. So when you get something, you think that's what it is, but it's, you know, you have to keep an open mind, and you do have to keep some healthy skepticism about you. But sometimes, not all the time, you will have that perfect moment where everything starts coming together. Now, I would say on average, because I only post those 30 seconds. If I'm on my Instagram and I want to show you my investigation of the jail, I'm just going to post that 1 minute video. I'm just going to post the 30 seconds that I caught on the recorder. But what you don't see is the 8 hours that I spent there and nothing was happening. And that's what happens on these investigations. That's the reality. And, you know, there are certain shows that were canceled because they're honest and they show it's not all blinking lights. It's not all ghosts coming out of the woodwork and running after you. It's mostly silent. And once in a while you get a little blip of activity. But when all of those things are considered together and there's some intelligence involved, that's when it's really interesting. Sorry, it was maybe a really roundabout answer to that, but
fine. That's good. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to know about that because I don't know. Some of the reasons why I even got the paranormal equipment is because at one point I do think it could be possible to show like somebody like having magical experiences with that stuff. So I do just wonder like if we could sometimes create some of the own evidence. Who knows? Mm-hmm. You want to go into? I'm sure you got another story too about another place.
I have so many stories.
Yeah, all right.
But I mean, my favorite story I'd like to share is just a wholesome one. So I went to a couple years ago the Sorrel Weed House in Savannah, and if anybody out there is familiar with that, there's a couple of things that were filmed there. Most famously, if you've seen Forrest Gump, and there's that scene where he's sitting in the park and there's a feather that's dropped from the top of a house, that was the Sorrel Weed House. But when it comes to the spooky legends of that place, it was covered on a bunch of TV shows. I know it was on Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters, but the long story short of it, it was a really creepy home. And it started out as a war barracks, and then they built a mansion on top of old war barracks. And the family that landed up there was the Sorrel family, and the man of the house was having a affair, probably not, something that the woman who he was having an affair with wanted. It was a woman that was enslaved. And so he was, messing around with her, and his wife caught them. His wife walked up to the top of the roof, the very roof where they dropped that feather from, the Forrest Gump scene, and she took her life. The very next day, the enslaved woman who the husband was having an affair with, probably against her will, was found hanging in her quarters. So it is very dark. It's a very dark property. People ghost hunt there all the time. The place actually hosts paranormal investigations, which I took part of. And so basically they let you, you investigate in various areas of the house. And my husband and I were with another couple, and we went around the entire property, no activity, nothing. We were in the basement where there were supposedly medical experiments done, by the father, no activity. Upstairs in the parlor, nothing. We go up to the carriage house, which was the living quarters for the enslaved people. And this was our last stop of the night. And the caretaker, the woman who was, hosting the event, as she was bringing us up there, she said, "Hey guys, this space is not a dark one. Even though some people died here, this space was their happiest space. This was when they had a long day at work and they, had a rough time. They would come back to their living quarters and they would sing, they would make dinner, they would have a nice time with one another. So please, keep it light in here, right? Just keep it light." So, I thought it might be a fun idea since, she had mentioned that they like to sing and they like to, do music up there. My husband's a musician. So I said, hey, maybe would you like to sing something? Maybe they might like it. Maybe it might, be a trigger to get some conversation. So my husband, of course, I put him on the spot and I'm recording him and I have a spirit box. And I asked him, I said, why don't you sing? Because it's always my request. But why don't you sing Blue Suede Shoes, right? It's my favorite song that he sings. So he sang Blue Suede Shoes, and almost immediately you hear a female voice come through the spirit box, and it swept over several stations. It was just as if somebody was singing along with him. And then there was a gruff old man that kind of came through, and it said, I don't trust him. And then a younger spirit, maybe a young kid, I'm not sure if it was a boy or a girl, said, he's okay. And then we heard the humming again. Now, for me, this was such a cool experience because we were doing something that kind of brought maybe these spirits together. Maybe they enjoyed singing in their lifetime, and that was something they, was a good part of their day. And we interacted with them in that sense. Now, I've never had that ever happen again on any other investigation, but it was a really profound moment. And I think that we did interact with the people that formerly lived there. And I do think that there are some spirits still hanging around. So it was really nice.
Nice. Is that your favorite one overall?
I don't have a favorite. It's hard, but I love that location just because, it wasn't a scary interaction. I've had all kinds of scary interactions, but that one was sweet. It was kind of pleasant, and I just thought it was interesting that we caught it all. And, it wasn't a negative thing at all, but I've had some really scary moments on investigations, but
I was going to ask you about that. If you want to go into maybe one of those, like what was the most scariest of one of them?
So, one of the scariest was I had something follow me home once. That was pretty scary.
I was just going to ask if you had ever had anything follow you home, but I was like, no, don't ask.
Yeah, it was.
Imagine
it was
she's
pretty,
like, not yet, and the next week one does, you'd feel so bad, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I spoke it.
But I don't know. I think that when it happened to me, it wasn't a negative thing. I think it was just accidental. I don't think the person meant to do it. I think they just didn't know where they were. But basically, long story short, I was investigating a property that I always investigate, that I've been maybe 100 times. And there was a new exhibit on display in the museum. And this exhibit was for the local railroad. So there was all kinds of artifacts and information that was on display. And when my team went in there, we were doing some investigating, I started feeling a vibration on my stomach. Now, the best way I could describe it is if you had your phone kind of tucked in your jeans and it was vibrating a little bit, it kind of felt like that. And I thought at first that my phone was in my waistband, but it wasn't. So I thought, oh, that's like a little strange, And then I would say maybe 20 minutes later, one of the other investigators was saying, oh, that's weird. I felt like I had a vibrating on my arm. And I'm like, oh, I felt that on my stomach just now. That's kind of interesting, and we both picked up on that. And for that whole night, we kind of felt like we were getting a lot of interactions from a male voice. There was male voices coming through our portal device. There was male voices coming through the spirit box. There was a male voice caught on the recorder. And it was just uncharacteristic for that location. But I digress. Now, at the end of the night, I left. I went home, and my husband and I went to bed. At some point in the middle of the night, I had a dream, and in my dream, I woke up in my room, and I felt like there was someone in the room. And it was very vivid, a very lucid dream. And I'm looking around the room, and I'm going, there's someone here. There's someone here. I look over at my husband. He's sleeping. I get out of the bed, and I look right on the floor next to my husband's side of the bed, and I see a man crouched down, like he's on all fours, and he's crouched, and he's looking up at me. He's got a bald head, I would say like late 40s, early 50s. He was covered in sweat, and his clothing looked like as if somebody worked on the railroad, possibly white or light colored clothing, but covered in dirt. And he was sweating, and he just looked really freaked out. And in this dream, I couldn't get the words out, but I wanted to say, get out, but in your dream, sometimes you can't get those things out. And I woke up in real life. So I wake up in my bed. Of course, I look over at my husband. He's sleeping. And this aroma comes over me, right? I smell what smells like body odor. Okay, it's kind of gross. And of course, I don't think it's me because I showered before bed. My husband showered before bed, but I checked my pits. I reached over and I, checked him out to see if he smelled bad. It's not us. We don't keep our laundry in our bedroom either. So I didn't think that was the source of it. But almost as immediately as I smelled it, it was gone. Now, I have to get up and investigate because now my heart's beating like crazy. I have this sense that there's somebody in my house. I'm freaking out. I searched my whole house. I don't find any reason for it, and I can't find any source of the smell. But I had smelled body odor, and then it was gone. And in some cases with paranormal stuff, you might catch what they call phantom smells or phantom fragrances, and it would match up with the dream that I just had, because I saw a man and he was profusely sweating and he looked, dirty. So I'm not sure. But the next day, when in the morning when we're up and everything was cool, I did sage my whole house and I opened every window and door and I basically said, hey, sorry if I took you home, but I don't want to keep you here. And I've never had a problem since. But it was really freaky, and I don't know if it was just a dream. It seemed really odd to just be a dream with that strange smell that was there one second and gone the next. So I don't know, but it certainly freaked me out.
Gina, it sounds like you do mainly like houses, like actual establishments. Do you ever do objects?
I have done some objects. I started collecting all sorts of old things, dolls, jewelry, photos, and I have had some interesting interactions with some of them, and I got some interesting responses on my equipment when I've used some of these objects, and I would say, objects. A lot of objects are in certain places, so that's kind of a hard one. I've investigated Robert the Doll in Key West, which is in a museum.
Have you?
Yeah.
So you went down there?
Yeah, that's a crazy story, and I don't know if people are going to like what I have to say about it, because when I talked about it on my Instagram, a lot of people went a little crazy. But have you heard of the story?
Yeah,
I went to visit him. I lived in the Keys for a while.
Oh, you did? Okay, so you probably heard this. That the museum asks people to ask permission before you take a photo. You've heard that? They recently changed the policy. They don't want anyone to ask permission anymore. And that broke the internet because everyone wanted to come out and fight with me about it. And I was there in November, and I was on the tour. I took the tour, and then afterwards they give you free time to explore and investigate. And the person who was running the tour that worked for the museum said, listen, as of recently, the owner of the museum, I don't know if he consulted with someone or I'm not sure, but there was talk of the fact that by asking permission, you are in a way giving permission to a spirit to do negative things. You're almost inviting it to you by asking permission, by giving it power. I don't know how much I believe in that, but that was how the owners feel. And that is why the owners changed the policy. So we were told, do not ask permission, take pictures and be cool. By being cool, he suggested, do not be rude, do not make fun of the doll, do not rant at the doll, do not say anything negative to the doll, because all this, that, and the other is going to happen. I was respectful. I took lots of pictures. I took lots of videos. Nothing bad happened to me. But I did not ask permission, and nothing bad happened to me. And everybody said, oh, your camera is going to go crazy and all these bad things are going to happen to you. And you know what? Nothing did, because I was respectful and I did what the museum asked. And I did get some activity with Robert, which was cool. I didn't get a ton of activity. I don't want to say it was, enough to fill a YouTube video, but basically I on an Ovilus device, if you've ever heard of one, it's a little digital word bank. And I got something that said secret reveal Robert. Okay. All those words came up at the same time, and I took a photo of it. So I have that evidence. And then when I was in the room with Robert, it was just my husband who was filming, me, and the doll. And I have a device that's called a portal. And the portal is something that works with a spirit box that simply stretches out the words a little bit longer using reverb so that you can hear it a little bit more clearly. And it cleans up some of that white noise so that it's less, it's a little cleaner. So during this time, I wasn't getting any responses. So I was, getting ready to wrap up. And I said, hey, Robert, you know what? I think you're a pretty cool guy. And you hear a little giggle. I said, all right, I'm getting ready to leave, but I just want to let you know, man, I think you're a cool guy. And I got what sounded like a childlike giggle through the spirit box, through my portal. And it was pretty interesting. And, does that mean anything? I don't know. It sounded kind of cheeky. I was being a little cheeky too. I was kind of, being lighthearted about it. But, that is one of the most famous haunted objects. And I did not feel negative at all around it. A lot of people say, oh, it's, you feel this negative, crazy energy around it. I personally did not feel that. But I also went there with an open mind, and I went there very much respectful. And I didn't say anything to taunt it. I didn't say anything to, push its buttons. So
if you go back, you should do, I don't know if you did this, the haunted ghost tour there in Key West.
I've done it before. Yeah, I've done it before.
There's so much freaky things down there.
Oh, girl, I know. And what's his name? The doctor,
Thank you. I was just about to bring that up.
Oh, doctor.
He preserved his wife or something, and
girlfriend. Not even. She wouldn't marry him. He was a tuberculosis doctor, and she was dying of tuberculosis, but she was still married technically, but she wasn't with her husband, but she wouldn't marry him. And when she died, he took her body and preserved it for years and
consummated it.
Oh, no, come on.
And well, the thing is that when they found, I think they found her, she had been dead for years.
So what he had done essentially was he made her into a doll. So what he was doing was he mummified her. He put wax and other preservatives around her face and, other areas. And he essentially made her into a mummy. And what he would do, what was suspicious, was he would always bring home flowers and he would bring home lots of perfume. So some people were getting suspicious of why is he doing this? Yeah. Because
hide the smell.
They knew he didn't have a lady friend,
Right.
Yeah, he was hiding the smell. Yeah. But some people actually claim to have, towards the end when he got caught, I don't know if it was children in the area or if it was neighbors, but somebody saw him dancing with the body. He was, la, 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 dancing around his living room with this thing, and someone saw it and they reported him. And it's dark. It's real dark. It's really, really dark. But in that museum, by the way, with Robert, they have the headstones. So when after he did all this, he dug her up from her grave and took her home. So her family did not want to rebury her and with a marked grave because they were concerned that he was going to find her again. So they kind of put her all over the island, supposedly. And the head markers, there's some head markers in the museum now. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was trying to look up his name. I think it was Carl something. I can't remember. But it was such a weird story. I remember that. And then they took us to the house where Robert the doll, he lived with the boy, right? And I think, didn't the mom try to get rid of the doll several times, and then the doll would just show up? I don't remember, but
it's Carl Tanzler, by the way.
That's it.
Doctor. I just wanted to look up the name. So with Robert, basically the mom, she didn't get rid of him and he came back. She would put him away in the attic, and it was basically the son developed a very unhealthy relationship with Robert. And, eventually somehow they got him away from the doll. But then when the parents passed away, he inherited the family home and he came back to the Keys with his wife. And then he started back up with the doll. And it was a very unhealthy attachment to the doll. And some people claim that they saw the doll running around. Some people claim that they saw the doll peeking out of the windows of the house. But ultimately, the doll landed up in the hands of another woman who kept him for many years until finally donating him to the museum. But she claimed, this is just what the museum said, that the doll locked her in a closet once. I mean, it sounds absolutely insane. But that's what she claimed. And, she gave the doll to the museum. And one thing I found really interesting about the doll that I didn't know, because I've listened to so many podcasts and I've seen so many shows about him, and I consider myself, a Robert the Doll enthusiast. But one thing I found out from the museum was Ozzy Osbourne had an attachment curse from Robert the Doll. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, Ozzy Osbourne visited Robert the Doll, and this is per his son. So this is Jack Osbourne telling this story to the docent, and apparently, because Jack Osbourne now has, had his show on is a Portals to Hell, is the show about paranormal. So he's into that now. But he claims, this is what he said to the docent of the museum, that Ozzy visited the doll and was taunting it, and he's like, "Yeah, you're not really haunted. It's a bunch of BS," whatever he said. And right around that time, he had some accidents. His Parkinson's really picked up. There were numerous things in his life that were kind of happening all at the same time, and he considers himself cursed from that doll. That's what he claims. So I thought that was pretty interesting because I'd never heard that before. Yeah,
that's really, really.
Somebody else on the show claims that they got cursed from the doll. I think they sent a letter in.
Yeah, a lot of people send letters, and
JJ.
the guy was telling me that there were some teenagers that were recently there. I don't know how many months before I had been there, but recently. And the kids were being kids, and they probably said things that they shouldn't. And apparently they were out the next day on their family's boat, and the boat sunk. And they had to be rescued by the Coast Guard. And the parents made the kids march back to the museum and apologize to the doll.
That's funny.
My gosh. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
I know, it's wild. I don't know. I just don't think that a doll is capable of that. But I also think that the power of, if you think that that's going to happen, it's the power of suggestion. But I still do approach everything with caution just in case. But I mean, it's a doll.
Yeah.
It's just a doll.
Never know. All right. You got anything that's coming up? Like any investigations that you got booked that you're looking forward to or anything?
Yes, I am really excited. So I have one place that's in the works, which I can't announce exactly the location right now, but it's coming up and it's going to be really cool. If anybody's in the Miami area, we have a historic location that has reached out to my paranormal team that is interested in hosting events. So we are doing a preliminary with them so that we can kind of feel out the building and kind of catch the hot spots. So we might have a new location coming up. And I also, one thing that's coming up for me is my team is joining this really cool paranormal team from the west coast of Florida. They're Beyond the Borders Paranormal and Beyond the Boundaries Paranormal. And they are bringing us to the Heard Opera House. And so we're really excited to check that out. And I also have a book in the works that hopefully will be finished by this summer. And my book is all about the cemetery symbolism we were talking about before. So I'm super stoked to finally get that out, because writing a book, if you've ever done it, is one of the hardest things ever. And I am just excited to finally have all of my ideas out there and share it with everybody.
Awesome. Good for you. Nice. Good luck on the book.
Thank you.
That's impressive stuff. Yeah, let me know when it's out. You come back on and promote it and talk a little bit more about the symbolism. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, awesome. Good luck. Good luck with the future stuff. Definitely keep checking out your Instagram. Lisa, was there anything that you wanted to ask or get into?
No, just I think this is very enlightening, because you watch it on TV and you kind of look at it on YouTube videos, but actually you get to ask somebody, about it, over the back, the backstories and stuff like that. So Gina, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed it. There's so many haunted places all over the world, and the fact that you've even taken it to the next level and gone to Europe and explored over there, as well as take photographs and all that other stuff. That I love that, because it's like boots on the ground, doing your own research and stuff like that. So I really, really, really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
But thank you. Mm-hmm.
Also, yeah.
And then, also, The one question, have you ever gone to places where like an incident has happened? Like a bad incident has happened?
Yes, I have. I actually have a few times. I've investigated a site that was used by a serial killer in the 1970s, and I've had some really interesting things happen from that. I would say that it's important research to do because we have evidence that we think that there might still be some people lingering in that area, both negative and positive people there. But what happened to me that was really interesting is I think that I had an interesting interaction with the site. There's a tree, and I was leaning up against the tree, and wearing a shirt just like I'm wearing right now, and my whole back was all where I'd leaned up against the tree was all burned, like as if I got sunburned. And I was in the woods and I was wearing clothing. It wasn't, and it very mysteriously was gone the very next day. I didn't have, and I think that in some areas, especially, where something horrific has happened, it just kind of leaves imprints, and, you might kind of interact with some of those. And I think many of it is residual, but I do think evil can stain certain locations, and evil acts and evil situations can absolutely leave a mark on a place.
That's a good way to say it. Stain on a mark.
That's a very interesting way to say it. Yeah. Very, very cool. I mean, not cool, but I mean, it's
interesting. It really
fascinating.
Is, from a research standpoint, it's fascinating to be able to document that. And I think what I experienced was residual. I think that it was just negative energy that was just lingering. I don't think there was anything really intelligent about it, but it's nonetheless, it's still something to take into consideration and something to document.
All right. You into Ghost Adventures? You watch that show?
I have a love-hate relationship with that show.
Oh, so do I.
I love it. But Zach is a little ridiculous.
Come on.
I mean, as much as he drives me nuts,
I watch it for the entertainment value.
Yeah.
Did you
hear what happened to Aaron?
Yeah. So I was just gonna ask you. I was like, yo, come on. Mofo's wife tried to kill him. I don't know. How did she try to kill him? I didn't even. I saw the article and I was like, I can't. I was like, I can't believe this right now. So I didn't even look at it.
She contacted someone in prison, a hitman, and paid him, I want to say it was $11,000 to murder Aaron Goodwin, her husband of 2 years, I think, or around 2 years. And she tried to do it while he was filming. So he was filming the show, and she sent this guy to murder her husband. And she got caught, and they have enough evidence to indict her for soliciting a hitman and something. There's 2 charges. I don't remember what they both were, but she's being charged with 2 different things. And she's being held for like $100,000.
Yo, imagine they popped off Zach by accident.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, he's a pretty big guy, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how you confuse those two.
He's such a nice guy. I just want to give him a hug.
Well, it seems like if anybody in the crew, this would happen to him though, right? Because you always have the shittiest luck, or at least they play it off like that on the show, right?
Yeah, and I just think that, sometimes, but this is my opinion on it. I think sometimes really nice will happen to fall into that category of getting with a partner that takes advantage of that. And I don't know them as a couple, but I think that sometimes when people are very just, not the alpha is a good way to describe it. They're kind of understanding, they go with the flow. They're just kind of very chill. And you have someone who's opposite from that. Sometimes they become a little bit of a doormat. And I could see that being the case here. And I absolutely think it was financially motivated. He makes money in that show, and he probably has other dealings. And she didn't want a divorce because she wanted the money. She wanted the life insurance. So, it's a tale as old as time. And what an idiot for even thinking she could get away with that.
Crazy,
And
yeah.
I hope if it is true, and it sounds like it is, because I think they have a lot of evidence against her, so I can't really like convict her before she's even been to court. But if it is true, I hope she gets the maximum time in prison for that. So
That's some wild
because
stuff.
see you later. Bye.
Yeah, I saw that. And I was
Crazy.
like, come on, Aaron, of all people. I was like, damn.
I
poor guy.
know.
Yeah, some weird stuff, man. Thanks again. Lisa, thank you again for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It was great
Thank
stuff.
You for
Very
having me.
interesting. Of course. Gina, again, would you like to let everybody know where they can find you and all your work?
So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at She Haunts, and I have a blog. I am a writer and a photographer, as well as a paranormal investigator. So you can follow along with me on my haunted investigations, and you can join me in the graveyard.
Awesome. And you have a link tree, correct?
Yes.
All right. I'm pretty sure that's already in the YouTube now for everybody. So if you want to go
Thank
check
you.
out his stuff, I'm pretty sure I already put the link tree in there.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you very much for coming on. And thank you, everybody who jumped in on the chat. That's what's up. I think a few new names in there. Might have actually maybe been from you. I don't know.
I saw my friend Matt was in the chat earlier. Matt is from a show called Dark Echoes Paranormal, and
nice.
he's the host and the producer, and they're doing their thing all the way up the East Coast. They're on Amazon and all kinds of Paraflix and other fun outlets. So yeah, I like to see some familiar faces in there. Thank you.
Of course. No, again, thank you for coming on. And again, seriously, when you're ready to drop that book, please let me know. You can come on.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll let you talk about it. You can promote it.
Thank you.
Of course.
And
again,
thank you guys for having me.
Of course, yeah. And again, everybody in the chat, thank you very much for coming and joining us tonight. That's what's up. That's why I go live. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.